Welcome, fans of the RPG Fanatic Show, to the first episode of the third season of the RPG Fanatic Show. Yes, the third year that we're going into the production of the show. And I want to do something a little bit special today. What we're going to do is a review of World of Warcraft, which doesn't really need to be reviewed, per se, but I put together the script over a number of years about my thoughts about World of Warcraft. And I decided that I'd like to share it with you guys in this very first episode of the third season of the show. So I hope you guys will enjoy it, and thanks again for sticking with me for 3 years. Some say that there really is no need to review World of Warcraft because it's the undisputed champion of the massively multiplayer online RPG world, and those individuals would be correct. There is no need for me to give a review to it, at least not in the traditional sense of the word. What I'm going to do with this video is critique World of Warcraft. My goal for this review is not to inform people about WoW, but rather analyze what makes it a successful game, and what makes it a stagnating game. Some have said that WoW was the first casual MMORPG, and I strongly disagree with that statement. WoW is an MMORPG that can be played in a casual way, but the bulk of content cannot be experienced by a casual player, such as raids and PvP. What also makes the game unfriendly to casuals is that its mechanics are constantly changing. Every few patches seem to dramatically change formulas, abilities, item effects, and sometimes even how a class is played. This means that if a player takes a break for a month or two, they may discover they need to completely relearn how to play their character, because some of the talents that make up their character's build doesn't exist anymore, or itemization has changed so substantially they need to re-gear their character. Now, having said that, there are some reasons why WoW has been so successful with casual gamers. Firstly, WoW is a very pretty game to look at. Compared to other contenders before it, like EverQuest, Lineage, and Ultima Online, WoW had very excellent level design. The roundness of the environments made it more realistic and enjoyable to explore, rather than everything being a flat field that went on forever. The graphical improvements of WoW made the game attractive to people who were put off by the stale, lifeless graphics of predecessor games. The next important thing was the Warcraft franchise. WoW had a strong user base built in right from the start. And while this is also true of other MMOs like Ultima and Lineage, at the time of WoW's release, Blizzard better integrated their world with the game than other MMOs based on existing franchises did. You can actually explore a lot of the places that made the Warcraft universe so interesting, rather than different areas that were set aside specifically for that MMO. WoW was also, in my opinion, the first user-friendly MMORPG. Dungeon instances made it easier for players to complete quest objectives and gear their characters, since they didn't need to wait for bosses to respawn or compete with campers. Upon death, players did not lose their items, and there was no permadeath either. The chat system was designed to emulate chat rooms rather than physical space, and the graphical user interface was much better designed with functions such as looking for a group. There was also no need for characters to constantly drink food and water just to survive, and leveling was at a faster pace than players were used to. World of Warcraft also had a quest-centric progression through the game, whereas prior MMOs offered quests, questing was not something you could do to obtain the highest levels. To obtain the highest level in previous MMOs, you needed to grind on mobs of enemies who respawned at specific points of maps, and you also needed to compete against other players camping these same enemies. WoW, on the other hand, designed tons and tons of quests, and organized them so that once a character finished questing from one NPC, they were directed to another NPC who would offer more quests. Additionally, many quests gave players decent equipment, allowing them to upgrade their items without needing to grind on mobs for rare drops in order to be able to stay geared for their level. This seems like such a simple, no-duh thing, but it was really rather novel for the primary method of gearing your character to be through quests and not farming monsters for loot. World of Warcraft also had excellent customer service. This is something taken for granted today, but the MMOs before WoW had terrible customer support. Some MMOs even did stupid things like allow players to be in-game tech support, and more often than not, this led to players abusing their powers of authority to harass other players they felt wronged them, or worse, use their abilities to benefit their friends. WoW had a very professional team of customer support reps, and the lead team members frequented the forums to inform players of changes to the game and answered questions. WoW's forums also didn't have the community board staff constantly fueling flames with smart-ass comments to customers, rather than extinguishing them with logical, well-argued points, or simple explanations on why some changes were needed to the game. Many MMOs before had community managers who believed their job was to intimidate players into being silent about the problems of the game's design, rather than collect data for the development team to use to make the game better and respond to player questions.
World of Warcraft also had real boss fight design. WoW's raid design was incredibly good for massively multiplayer online RPGs, compared to what existed before. Nax is one of the best examples. Fights weren't just about beating the boss's HP bar down, but also incorporating puzzle elements more similar to what you'd find in an action-adventure game like the Legend of Zelda series. By mixing up the challenges in this way, a considerable amount of depth was given to the gameplay. Now, the people at Blizzard were not just born with the knowledge on how to make an excellent MMO. In fact, the early alpha and beta versions of WoW had huge design issues. For example, Res Sickness, the debuff characters receive after resing at spirit healers, which reduces their stats dramatically, was originally awarded to any character that dies, even if they were res by their characters. This resulted in characters being unable to play the game for long periods of time, even if they died in a party. But Blizzard listened to player feedback and did heavy research into the genre. It was the first professionally produced MMORPG in my mind because of the methodology that was used to create it was more scientific than experimental. Blizzard was also different in that after a game was designed they didn't break up the development team and hand the reins of the game over to a different team. The lead designers remained on the game and continue to remain on the game throughout the lifespan of the game. This has resulted in what Chris Metzen often refers to as tribal knowledge about the mechanics of the game and the temperament of the community. And it gave Blizzard an advantage over developers who weren't retaining the original development team of their MMOs, instead either laying them off or reassigning them to develop new MMOs. Additionally, some predecessor games were rather unfocused on what kind of gameplay experience they wanted to offer players. Was it a game of hack and slash combat or a virtual world meant to simulate everything the real world had to offer? WoW was focused from the start to be a game focused on combat and made no attempts to simulate political systems or economic markets. Features like player housing and guild halls were rejected, instead allowing the team to focus exclusively on polished PvE and PvP systems. WoW, like most modern MMORPGs, is a min-max game. What this means is that in order to win encounters, characters must be optimized for these encounters. However, a certain amount of min-maxing will occur in any game because players seek to maximize the return for their effort. Now, some people feel this is a negative thing, but I believe it is perfectly normal and understandable. Many players have limited time to play a game, so they seek to make the most out of the time they play. The need to make the most of their time leads them to make min-max characters, so they can have the highest chance of succeeding at a task, for each failure causes them to spend more time on this task. I believe a well-designed task for the average player is going to offer several routes to victory, not just one. This is because with more than one road to victory, the player has a higher chance of obtaining victory. Games that have only one rocky road to victory are challenging because not only does the player have to find this one road to victory, but they need to actually succeed at the task. So if the way to win is exceptionally difficult because the strategy requires flawless teamwork, hard to obtain items, or sheer dumb luck as part of the strategy, it is too hard of an encounter. Now, while I have praised WoW in a number of areas, there are some other areas I view as problematic. For one, WoW is a game that is rebalanced constantly. This is primarily because the game has more classes than it has combat roles. There are only 3 combat roles in the game: tankers, DPS, and healers. However, there are 10 classes, and then on top of those classes, there are 12 races. Then each class has 3 different ways it can be spec'd. This means there is a lot of different ability parameters to consider, meaning there are well over 20 different ways you can build a character. The objective of Blizzard's class balancing is to make classes that perform similar roles equal to another class performing those roles, but the inherent flaw of the game's design makes this an unobtainable goal. Because classes are not carbon copies of each other, they will never be equal. The differences also create frustration in the player base, and the desire of the dev team to appease this frustration leads to constant rug pulling and retinkering. In my opinion, there shouldn't have been any pure classes in WoW. That is, classes which can only perform one role in a party, such as mages, warlocks, and rogues. Every class should have been a hybrid, and each talent tree should have existed to perform one combat role each. And some talents should have existed for casuals to solo with, and some for raiding with, and one to PvP with. Trying to balance warriors who can tank, but can also do identical DPS in a raid to warlocks and rogues, is just too complex to make happen when one class can only do one thing, because players of the pure class expect themselves to be masters at that one thing, since it is the only thing they can do. That is, after all, fair. Also, because mastery of the game's mechanics is demonstrated by min-maxing, character roles should be homogenized so there is balance between factions and players do not feel the hours they spend leveling one character is now wasted because a design error allowed someone else to be vastly superior to them in that role. I'm pointing a finger at racial abilities here. For example, orcs are believed to make the best death knights in the game because the best death knight weapons are two-handed axes, and orcs have an exclusive bonus to expertise with two-handed axes. Just so I am clear, I'm not saying classes that can be respec'd to fulfill needed party roles are wrong. I am saying that creating some classes which can only do one role is wrong in a game where half the classes can do multiple roles. Pure classes in World of Warcraft are a design weakness that is crippling the development team's ability to make a balanced game, and has been forcing the developers to tweak with the mechanics every other patch in an endless effort to resolve these issues, which results in a frustrated player base. I believe the players of WoW have tolerated these changes for many years because, at the end of the day, most players of the game don't realize the imbalances, and those who recognize them are willing to grudgingly respect and reroll characters so they can play whatever the current flavor of the month is. They've gotten used to doing this, but who knows for how long they will continue to tolerate this aspect of gameplay. Anyway, throughout all the incarnations of WoW, there have always been three classes who are the most popular at a specific task. Out of all the classes in the game, one class always gets viewed as being the best tank, or the best DPS, or the best healer. And this goes for PvP too, where one class gets viewed as the best for PvP DPS and best for PvP healing. And the classes viewed as the best classes are always the ones who are most easily able to perform these roles. This is because even if all classes are capable of doing each role, only one of these classes is going to offer a playstyle most people find easiest to play with. And because players want to win and hate to lose, they look for the easiest and most certain ways to win, thus gravitating toward the classes that are easiest to play. And while players do enjoy challenging gameplay, most do not intentionally nerf their chances to win unless there is some special reward for doing so, like a rare mount from an achievement or something. You also need to consider that although raiding counter strategy is something some people grasp quite quickly, there is a sizable portion that does not. Actually, I'd say the majority of casual players don't grasp raid strategy, and would never clear a raid if they weren't partying with others who carry them through encounters. Basic skills like DPS rotations defy them. The lack of skill of the casual gamer to play WoW effectively further encourages players to use cookie-cutter builds, which make encounters easier to overcome, leading them into the habit of only playing classes and builds that are slightly better at a task than other classes and builds. Yet, despite this inherent design flaw, Blizzard adds more races and classes to the game, in the hopes of retaining player interest and encouraging people to check it out. But ultimately, adding this content bloats the game mechanics and makes it harder and harder for Blizzard to balance the game. Now, having said all of this, we must examine whether class balance is truly important or not. For me, the answer is not so cut and dry. Class balance is only important because players get emotionally attached to the idea of a class. For some, playing a paladin who smites the wicked with holy power is more appealing than a cursed death knight who uses dark magic and diseases. For a new player to the game, the first character they roll has less to do with abilities and more to do with their character concept. However, if the abilities of the character do not match the player's mental picture of what the class should be, they become upset. So when people tell them to respect to perform a role that doesn't fit their idea of the class, such as a paladin healer, because the usefulness of that class in the role the player wants to perform is subpar, the new player becomes understandably angry. The design of paladins from Vanilla WoW and the Burning Crusade are a perfect example. They were poor tanks in DPS in Vanilla WoW, only useful as healers, and while during the Burning Crusade they became slightly better tanks, they were still not as good as warriors. This upset many players because paladins in media are usually holy warriors, not medics. In fact, most paladins in the lore of the Warcraft universe were mighty warriors. Blizzard did resolve many of these problems before Wrath of the Lich King launched, but that the disconnect existed for so long left a bad taste in many players' mouths. This is the same problem WoW and other MMORPGs generally have with class balance. They have more than one class trying to perform the same role, rather than one class to perform each role. Switching up the numbers only changes who is better at the role and never addresses the real problem. There can be only one. And even in a hypothetical and logically impossible situation where two classes with different capabilities and playstyles perform the same role identically, for example, warriors and rogues both capable of dealing out equal amounts of DPS, the community would still disown one while preferring the other based on perceptions they have. This is because online communities have herd mentalities. A significant portion of the player base will do what their peers do and believe what their peers believe. Facts to the contrary be damned. I believe that WoW will always be in a state where the development team switches around which classes are better than others, and there will never be a time the classes are equal to one another. It is possible this might even be Blizzard's intent, because by constantly forcing players to relearn how to play their class and re-gear their characters for each spec, Blizzard prevents endgame players from being content with their characters. And when players become content with their achievements in a game, they lose interest in it. However, for me, once I realized to play WoW means to constantly relearn your character and re-gear your character, even after you've conquered all the raids, because Blizzard is always screwing with class balance, I lost a great deal of interest in the game. After I master a class in a game, I don't want to remaster it just because the formulas behind all its abilities change every few months. But in this regard, I realize that I'm a minority. I hope that you have enjoyed this in-depth analyzation of World of Warcraft. This essay was several years in the making.
Hey kiddies, it's me, the Student Sword, co-host of the RPG Fanatic show, and all of this other stuff on this channel. Anyway, why don't you take a look at some of these other videos done by the RPG Fanatic, Kerry Martell himself. How about it? Also, like and subscribe to our channel for great justice!